Previously on Magoosh Medrek.
Don't open the door for anyone.
Oh, hello, little bird. Ouch!
The cloud of crows dragged Anya Schmendrick up the chimney by her hair, the sound of their bones and beaks crunching in her ears. Alas, no one saw the birds fly her out and over the evil west woods. No one except her brother, who stood there now more frightened than he had ever been in his entire life.
I love you.
1885. An age of emerging opulence for Europe is dawning as science and industry draw her population centers towards a new and promising century. But in the untamed forests of the East lurk monsters that hunger for violence as they gorge themselves on terror and innocent blood. One man can be counted on to fight back the creatures of the night, and his name is Magoosh Medrek, Vampire Hunter. The creeping shadows of the hungry twilight crawled along the forest floor, stretching and contorting beneath the violet bruised sky peering through the clutching canopy of branches above the boy's head. The sun was setting now, and Otto Schmendrick, who was seated with his back against a gnarled oak tree, had resigned himself to failure. He had spent a miserable morning and an even worse afternoon lost in panic and regret and guilt, and now he himself was lost in the woods, all semblance of direction long since gone, along with his last shred of hope. Otto Schmendrick had known what he would find when he returned to the house, or rather what he wouldn't find, but even that grim knowledge did not prepare him for what awaited him upon opening that door. The entirety of the house, every surface, had been covered in bird droppings. There had been a small pile of dead crows spilling out of the fireplace, and the stench had been considerable. And she had been gone. His dear sister Anya had finally been taken. Though he had watched it with his own eyes, he still could not believe the truth of what he had seen. Confirming that she was indeed not in the house, he had been faced with a terrible decision. Did he wait for his father to return, or did he go after her himself? He knew that she had literally now only a handful of hours left to live before being ripped and torn, eaten by some monster. He couldn't stand to think about that. The combination of mortal terror and his sense of responsibility for his beloved sister made the choice for him. Without so much as a thought to grab a candle or some food or perhaps most importantly a weapon, Otto Schmendrick ran out of the house with the impetuosity of his age and followed the trail of crushed crow carcasses out into the old west woods. It had been as if the forest had not wanted him to find her. The path meandered easily enough among the trees, which at first had stood straight and true. But as soon as he had crossed the threshold into the old west woods, a wild and haunted place where humanity had not yet set hold, he quickly became disoriented. The standing sentinels twisted into grotesque shapes that loomed and lurked and lurched, bullying the path about aimlessly. A chill fog that refused to burn off stubbornly shrouded the forest, and more than once he lost the path completely, needing to backtrack for longer and longer periods of time, only to find that he was still on the path. Otto Schmendrick had found traces of his sister along the way here and there, a scrap of her dress, a lock of her hair, but these tokens only served to tease and confound him, and now they had disappeared completely. For hours he felt like he had been walking in circles, and now, seated against that skeletal tree, hungry, exhausted, shocked with grief and fear, he gave up, and he hated himself for it. They would both die tonight, and it was his fault. Just then, he heard it. A female voice, distorted slightly by distance but most definitely feminine, drifted to his desperate ears from away on his left, and the voice was singing. His heart dropped into his stomach, and Otto immediately jumped up and listened in the direction of his melodic Beatrice, pausing to make sure he wasn't dreaming by pinching himself hard. The singing continued, floating with the fog, haunting and yet sweet, coming from off the path. Otto Schmendrick found a tentative hope again with that voice, and with a ragged breath, he plunged with reckless abandon into the obscurity of the wild wood. The underbrush pulled at his limbs and low branches whipped his face and shoulders, but he felt none of it, so intent was he on finding the source of that sonorous voice. He couldn't quite make out what she was singing, but to his panicked ears, it was like a muse singing just for him, letting him know that all will be well, all will work out in the end. He followed the singing through the gathering shadows, through the terrain that had immediately become more difficult to navigate away from the stark, sandy path. He flailed around gnarled trees and crashed through thorny bushes, precariously negotiating hidden tree roots and stumps, but it wasn't until he had almost rolled his ankle on a hidden knoll that a small voice inside his head began to buzz with doubt, and the epicenter for this sudden infusion of logic was that voice. Otto Schmendrick's sister sang beautifully, but certainly not with a woman's voice, and not with one possessed of such poise and professional polish. All of his senses started to tingle, and a scary thought popped into his consciousness as if by some horrible magic. Maybe this was a trap. He was drawing close to a small clearing in the trees now, but felt like a man who had awakened in the middle of a shark-infested sea with no direction, feeling safe. Then, as he approached the open glade, he saw a faint glowing light floating at waist level above the ground. It swayed and danced back and forth, a ghost in the gloom, and it sang with the voice of an angel, hovering hypnotically. Thus it was, in his haste to achieve his goal, and as a consequence of his inattention elsewhere, that Otto Schmendrick found his forward progress arrested immediately, and with savage abruptness. Snares from an evil-looking tendrilled shrub seemed to come out of nowhere and wrap themselves around his ankles, causing him to fall flat on his face. He opened his mouth to scream, and it was immediately filled with moist earth as he crashed into the forest floor, making gag. He spit out the mossy loam disgustedly. Otto Schmendrick reached towards his feet, only to find that his wrists were immediately ensnared in a similar fashion before his eyes, vines snaking across the ground and encircling his hands, pulling themselves taut, rendering him immobile. He thrashed about, struggling against his binds, which only served to tighten them, tiny thorns digging painfully into his skin. The mist swirled in the clearing as the voice moved closer to him until, mere heartbeats later, it cleared, and he saw it. The monster was smaller than he had anticipated, but it was ugly. A disfigured, malformed lump of wild, coarse brown hair on a low-profile body, knives attached to twisted feet. With a grotesque, elongated snout, it loomed out of the fog, lumbering laboriously on short legs, an excessively long tongue whipping to and fro, tasting the damp air. Otto let out a scream of disgust and surprise. The angelic voice stopped its singing, and the forest went quiet, listening. Otto Schmendrick thrashed back and forth in a panic, terrified of the creature before him, a fleeting vision of his sister lying in jagged pieces on the ground flashing before his eyes. The vines pulled tighter again, and Otto was forced to stop his struggle. He lay on the forest floor gasping for breath, completely beaten, tears of frustration and rage and anguish painting his face. He squeezed his eyes shut and had a moment to wonder what it would feel like to be ripped in half and chewed while still alive. Humans have an almost uncanny spatial awareness when their vision becomes limited, and at that moment Otto felt the monster arrive, sniffing and chuffing, settling alarmingly between his legs. Otto Schmendrick's eyes almost fluttered open as he suddenly realized that his legs were spread wide, being held as he was by his organic binds, and he whispered a quick prayer to whatever god might be listening, though he didn't believe in one himself, that he be spared the indignity of having his schwanz bitten off. Then the monster's thick scent washed into his nostrils and, well, it actually smelled pretty good. The thing smelled like cinnamon and cloves, old tobacco and leather. This incongruous fact was pushed out of his head, however, as the thing began to claw at the ground between his legs, and Otto was certain that he was about to die as a eunuch. He then heard a quiet and felt his face caressed by something long, thin, and wet. Otto Schmendrick's 13-year-old brain had never been one for book learning, but his brief life experience was enough to properly interpret that stimuli and come up with the correct interpretation. The creature had just licked his face. He heard that sound again and felt its tongue flit across his mouth. As a reflex seized the poor boy, he opened his mouth to scream again, never considering that this might be an invitation to French kiss a monster. But a voice in the mist cut him off.
What the hell do you think you're doing?
Otto Schmendrick opened his eyes to see an imposing figure striding out of the fog, fire flashing in his gaze. He was dressed in a long, tapered leather coat with an absolutely ridiculous hat perched upon his brow and set at a rakish angle. He had lengthy dark hair that cascaded from beneath, which was streaked with silver, and he wore a well-trimmed salt and pepper goatee with a connected mustache beneath a slightly crooked nose. His eyes glittered crazily in the gloom. Slung against his hip was what looked like a large doctor's bag. In one hand he held a battered lantern which cast a feeble illumination in the gathering gloom, and in the other he brandished a long, dangerous-looking spear. Before Otto could process the entire vision in front of him, the figure yelled in a resounding voice,
Belmont! You know better than that. How many times do I gotta tell you? No, leave it alone. That's mine and you know it's mine.
The figure raised its spear menacingly while taking aim directly at the poor boy, all trussed up, a pathetic and helpless victim completely at the mercy of a mythic monster and a malicious marauder. The man ferociously yelled into the twilight, and Otto, realizing that the pair were in collusion, closed his eyes again, now truly resigning himself to the inevitable excruciating pain and suffering that was to be his lot upon exiting this young life. The impact drove the breath from his body with all the force of an executioner's axe, the weapon slamming brutally down, driving into the soft earth beneath. From far away, the boy heard his murderer exclaim,
God in Himmel! Ha! That was a close one. You almost got it that time. That means that either you're getting faster or I'm getting slower, and we all know that Magoosh Medrek is always at the ready. What the hell was that?
Otto Schmendrick, a wave of confusion washing over him as he failed to experience any pain from the blow, opened his eyes cautiously. Stuck into the ground a mere centimeter from Otto Schmendrick's aforementioned schwanz, which had shrunk to its most diminutive size in self-defense, was the spear. He had not been killed, was in fact not even the intended target of the thrust. The stranger yanked the pole arm out of the ground, and impaled on its sharpened tip was a black stone. A musky, pungent aroma filled the air, and Otto wrinkled his nose at the unfamiliar scent. The maniac brought the stone up to his nose and inhaled deeply. A satisfied, guttural purr passed his lips, and his crazed eyes took on a faraway, dreamy look.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
He turned his gaze to look at Otto for the first time.
This is gonna take my Kartoffelknödeln to the next level.
He waited for a reply from the boy, but Otto was dumbstruck with liquid fear pumping through his veins.
What? Don't tell me you don't like Trüffelverwandter shaved over your Kartoffelknödeln. What are you, some kind of peasant?
Otto Schmendrick opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He tried to shake his head, but only succeeded in looking pathetic. The figure raised an eyebrow as he saw the boy's clothing and general demeanor.
Oh, Well, yeah, that makes sense. Look, you're welcome to eat your schlop or whatever you call your hot cuisine here out in the boonies, but I'll tell you what, this truffle is gonna wipe the floor with that god-cursed Arschgeiger Klaus at the upcoming Vampire Hunter Summer Solstice Shindig.
Otto Schmendrick was hungry, scared, exhausted, and generally under duress, so he was not processing most of what this crazy man was saying, but he did understand one word.
Vampire? There! Get down! Red alert! Kill a vampire on the loose! Everybody panic!
The famed vampire hunter Magoosh Medrek exploded into a frenzy, spinning around frantically, simultaneously cowering while karate chopping the air around him with his lantern, in a raucous paradox of cowardly aggression and violent retreat. The monster, which Otto had forgotten in his terror, now leapt onto the crazy man and began lashing at him with its long tongue, trying to snatch the truffle, whatever that was, which was still impaled on the spear tip. This focused Magoosh's attention enough to snatch his prize from the spear and deftly hide it away in the doctor's bag while pushing the beast back to the ground with a reproachful glance. He then paused a moment, a contemplative look coming into his piercing blue eyes, and then with a decisive exhalation, he plunged the spear into the earth next to him and placed the lantern on the ground next to it. He bent down and patted the monster's flat, strange head, cooing,
Oh, I can't stay mad at you. You did such a good job finding that truffle. Yes, you did. Who's a good Belmont? It's you. You're a good boy. Do you want a snack?
At the sound of that word, the diminutive werewolf became excited and started to jump up on the man. But it was more of a playful commotion with much less throat-ripping than Otto had expected. In fact, if the boy didn't know any better, he would have said that this monster was acting much in the way as a family pet might once it had been tamed. Was it possible this was not the monster after all? The stranger pulled a glass jar from his doctor's bag, and Otto felt his stomach drop, as swarming inside the jar was a black and red mass of ants. To his horror and fascination, Otto watched as the man unscrewed the cap in one graceful, elliptical gesture, and he swept the jar into the air, producing a writhing rainbow of ants, almost in slow motion. The creature reared its hind legs and screeched in delight, making a sound akin to a handful of rusty nails being tossed into a meat grinder. Its outrageous tongue flashed from its snout and swept a third of the ants that were in flight into its ravenous maw, making noisy slurping sounds and contented grunts. The ants fell to the ground, skittering where they fell in a mad attempt to find safety. But it was a useless endeavor. The tongue swept back and forth, disappearing into the elongated snout covered with tiny insects, and then re-emerging clean. And throughout there was that sound, that jarring sound that buzzed in Otto's head.
He prefers the red ones because they're more spicy,
came the man's voice, providing commentary on the monstrous feeding frenzy which had unfolded before the boy's eyes.
But watch out, because they always give him gas.
Just then, Otto Schmendrick felt one of the tendrils of the evil shrubbery snake its way around his throat and start to squeeze with an iron grip. His air was immediately cut off, and with a sickly gasping noise, Otto began to see black spots. He thrashed around, trying in vain to break free, but he was stuck and slowly being strangled. Through his fading vision, Otto saw a nightmare scene of ants being consumed en masse, while the strange traveler looked on in loving contentment, nodding his head at the slurping sounds which filled the quiet forest. Another tendril encircled his mouth and started to constrict around his face, and in panic, Otto Schmendrick opened his mouth wide and, stifling a gagging hork at the feeling of the cold vine against his lips, he bit down furiously. A viscous, slick fluid filled his mouth, and the mass of vines around his face and throat loosened for a moment as the taste and smell of wet, noxious plant matter filled Otto's nasal cavity. The vine whipped back, momentarily unspooling from his head, its tiny spines tearing little holes all along his tongue and cheeks, and with the last of his strength, the defiant peasant pushed all the breath out of his failing lungs with one word.
Vampire.
Magoosh Medrek, The Killing Moon was conceived, written, performed, and produced by
Me, Magoosh Medrek.
Oh, here we go. Conceived, written, produced, and performed by
Magoosh Medrek.
No, by me, Sasha Mereu. Additional voices this week by
Magoosh Medrek.
were by Daisy and Eskridge. The Magoosh theme and additional music were composed and performed by
Magoosh Medrek.
Danny Tuggle. Opera vocals were performed by I said were performed by Okay, good, he's gone. Opera vocals were performed by
Magoosh Medrek.
Dana Wirth, come on! Additional
Magoosh Medrek.
sound effects
Magoosh Medrek.
were
Magoosh Medrek.
courtesy
Magoosh Medrek.
of
Magoosh Medrek.
Zapsplat.com
Magoosh Medrek.
and Kixabay.com.
Magoosh Medrek.
I give up.
So stay tuned next week and find out all about... That's me.
You know, sometimes I don't even know why I try.
Oh, come on, don't be like that. Here, do you want some mixed nuts?
Well, okay, I guess so. Thanks, that's something.
Gott in Himmel, Schatzi. I can't believe you fell for that one. Oh, Magoosh out.